Welcome to the Digital Task Force discussion about reporting on equity, justice, and race in the 21st century. Moderated by Natalie Moore, reporter on race, class, and communities for WBEZ, Chicago's NPR affiliate.
Good evening, everyone. I'm happy to be here, and it's a pleasure to introduce this panel. We have Jasmine Brown, Senior Producer of Race and Culture at ABC News, John Williams IV, Features and Culture Reporter for the Baltimore Sun, Zoe Jackson, reporter at the Minneapolis Star-Tribune, and a Report for America Corps member. Unfortunately, Delano Massey of CNN can't be with us this evening. And we are going to take questions the last 15 minutes. Please put your questions in the Q&A feature, and I will get to them. But feel free to use the chat to give snaps, to co-sign, or respond to anything that you're hearing this evening. The first question I want to ask each of you is, what was your job like before George Floyd's murder, and has it changed since then? And John, let's start with you.
Sure. Before George Floyd's murder, I was a features magazine reporter for the paper with a concentration on food, fashion, pop culture, and a lot of those fun feature topics. Since then, I have shifted a little bit and now cover diversity, equity, and inclusion through the lens of race and demographics. I think that it's been beneficial to have that the background that I did because I'm able to weave in a lot of those issues into a feature topic or format. I do think that makes that type of news a little more palatable for people. People do need that type of balance when they are looking to read stories in the paper. Everything can't be doom and gloom, but at the same time, I think that I'm able to get across a lot of these themes through the lens of a features type position. So for example, I was able to write a piece during Thanksgiving about how Black Marylanders eat sauerkraut during the holidays as a side dish. So that's very unique to Maryland, and I've lived all over the country and I've never seen Black people eat sauerkraut as a side dish during the holidays.
Me either.
So, yeah. It's because, Maryland had a large German population, mm-hmm. and they were a large slave owning population. And that's where the transference came about. So it was a good opportunity to take an everyday thing that people might not necessarily know existed or was unique to other areas or unique to that area. And I was able to turn it into essentially a history lesson that weaved in slavery and cultural, a cultural transfer and things of that nature. So I think that that's really important when you are dealing with these beats, finding common ground and finding areas where people might not necessarily know the history behind what we do on a regular basis. Yeah.
What about you, Zoe?
Before George Floyd, I was a college student wrapping up my journalism degree, actually. And at that point, I was kind of going into a position focused on young voters and the election, back when, I guess, even before COVID, back when that was kind of the main story of last year. So I definitely had to pivot a little bit. I mean, I got here to Minneapolis the week after George Floyd was murdered, and I definitely had to pivot to covering such a emotional story and just pivot in my coverage a little bit too. And most recently, I was on our communities team covering the Chauvin trial. We had like a spot team of 5 or 6 reporters specifically covering community narratives that were, not the police narrative, that were centered around people of color. And that was really cool. I mean, to be able to write a story in Minnesota where not a single person in the story is not a person of color was something that I didn't really expect that I would be doing, and it was pretty cool. Yeah, and now I'm kind of covering St. Paul, which is the like twin city to Minneapolis, which is one of the most diverse cities in Minnesota. So I'm definitely taking like what I learned from covering mostly only communities of color to that beat now in the coming weeks.
Yeah, my first job was at the St. Paul Pioneer Press as a reporter.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
And Jasmine, was there anything that changed for you?
Yeah, so I was actually taking time off. I was doing the Nieman Fellowship, which is a fellowship that allows journalists to just take time to focus on a project and really hit pause on their careers. And what had propelled me to go and do the Nieman was to actually really think deeply about the ways in which we are covering Black men, particularly when it comes to policing, and really wondering why is it that we have so many videos, we have cell phone, we have body cameras, we have all of the knowledge about what happened now, and yet we're still telling the same story over and over. And unfortunately, I don't have the solution. Even taking 9 months off and thinking about that, I still don't know. And it was crazy to come back. Actually, my first day of work was June 1st, which was one of the big weekends in which the uprisings had happened. And we immediately went into action, really trying to just capture the moment and talk about what's happening. And someone had a question about how do you remain objective as a Black reporter? And I think we had a real conversation about that. And one of the things that we decided is that, what we needed to do was to start bringing ourselves to the reporting. And we had a piece in which our Black male correspondents actually talked about moments in which they had been stopped by the police and what that is like. Because we're all human, we all experience these things. We all have fears. We all worry about our loved ones. And I don't think that we're doing ourselves a service by pretending that we don't feel this, that this isn't real, that it's not touching us. And then shortly after that, a couple of months later, I wound up stepping into a race and culture role at World News.
A lot of newsrooms have created race beats in the past year. In your own shop, and perhaps others, if you're observing, how do you make sure that it's not the beat du jour and that it's something that your news organization has a commitment to? And in addition, with this shift in coverage, what holes do you think are still there?
I think we're lucky I'm lucky at the Baltimore Sun, where we have buy-in from top leadership. I head up our diversity committee, and I've done that for the past 2 years. And a lot of the initiatives that we have been working on and doing, predated 2020. So a lot of the things that you're seeing in the paper now, and the changes that are coming about are a reflection of things that we've had in the works for a while. And I think that that's why we've been pretty successful in creating a diversity, equity, and inclusion team. Hiring 2 reporters from Report for America who cover Black and the Black community and culture, and the Latinx community. These are things that we had that we've been working on for years before that. Having a content audit that through the Maynard Institute, we basically revived their content audit program because no one in the country was doing it. So we were the beta for that, their content audit. And as a result of that, all newsrooms in Tribune have received diversity training and implicit bias training. So these are things that we have had in the works for a while. And I guess I am lucky that we have that, because it forces everyone in the newsroom to change their lens on how they are approaching stories. So it's not necessarily pandering to people, and it's not performative. It's the lay of the land at that point. So I think that that's very important, that you have buy-in from the top, and then you realize that it's not just the job of the Black and brown people in the newsroom to tell these stories, it's everyone's job. Diversity, equity, inclusion, that and fairness, that is, that's what all newspapers and all people in the newsroom should be striving to incorporate in their coverage.
John, when did you get that buy-in, and how did you get that buy-in from the top?
So a little bit, maybe 2.5 years ago, our executive editor / publisher and our managing editor called a half dozen of us into a meeting, and they said that they wanted to revive our diversity committee. And they said, you all basically have the reins to run this however you want. We want it to be reporter driven. And I was elected chair, and I had a laundry list of initiatives and things that I wanted to accomplish. And we were able to do it. And I think that that's important. If you have management who trust who they have brought into the newsroom and trust their expertise, that things will work. So as a result of that, we have a diverse expert database. We have significantly increased the diversity of our summer interns. I believe the past 3 or 4 years, the majority of the interns have been women, and the majority of the interns have been people of color. So increasing that pipeline. We now have a cultural competency style guide for the entire newsroom, which is basically the lay of the land. And we obviously have the content audit from Maynard, so that we can see the data and we can see our soft spots and our fault lines, so that we can improve coverage that way. So having that buy-in from the top means that everyone in the newsroom steps in line, they fall in line. There is no ifs, ands, or buts about it. I remember that Knight Ridder years ago had the motto, diversity, no exceptions, or no excuses. I'm sorry, diversity.
Yes, I remember.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And it always stuck with me that, that came from the top, but it permeated through the entire newsroom. And I think that that's what we have been doing at The Sun. We've had our top editors who have said, this is how things are going to go. And people have been receptive to it. And you've seen the shift in the coverage. I hear all the time that our paper has never been more Black than it is now, because people are seeing themselves represented for maybe the first time in their lifetime in a variety of ways. It's not just one or the other. You're seeing the entire array or spectrum of Black life and culture, and other groups as well. I mean, I can keep on going.
Well,
I'd say, I totally agree about buy-in from the top. Our positions were created actually pre-George Floyd. They were greenlit in January of last year. And I think, I think it's unfortunate to say, sorry, I have a cat who will start talking. I think in 2021, it's a hard pill to swallow that we need to have, a race and culture unit. I was initially hesitant about the job, thinking like, is this the 60s again? Are we going back to the race beat? What is going on? But I think that we have been able to be very productive in shining a light on the fact that our material needs to be more representative of what America now looks like. And our newsrooms need to be more representative of what America looks like. And we're not there yet. And there's work to be done.
Yeah, I definitely think that just like politics or economics, race and inclusion permeates everything and should be a part of everyone's job, and not just the people of color in the room and the people who are on the race beat. And here in the Twin Cities, we're going to keep covering that because that story here is going to last at least probably another year with, sentencing and the trial for the other 3 officers coming in August, and possibly a retrial, who knows? So, I mean, I feel like there's no way to let that story go by the wayside here. And I definitely think that a lot of activists and people on the ground here are raising, concerns about Minnesota's like segregation and racial disparities that a lot of folks feel like kind of lead to Black men being killed by police in the state. So now that we're out of the, breaking trial type of stories, I think it's, perfect time for us to do those kinds of stories. And the Star Tribune added a diversity and inclusion like AME to the masthead. Her name is Kendall Harkness. She's amazing. She was a photo editor who's now in that role, and she's still winning photo awards even as she's in this new role, as well as a like diversity initiative that was headed up by a few of our reporters. So I'm hopeful.
Jasmine, producers are the muscle of a newsroom. What are the elements you look for in a story?
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of the basic things that you learn when you're, young about the who, what, when, and why. But for me, it's also knowing a strong character, who is going to bring you into the story. And I really try to make it so that people feel what the issue is. And also visual elements. It's a broadcast. I work for broadcast, so there's a lot of great articles that I've read that spark something in my head that then I realize, it's a really hard and difficult story to be able to tell on TV. I had a story on child brides in the United States. It's legal in 46 states now. At the time, it was legal in 50. And it took us 2 years to put that story on because many of the young women didn't want to come forward and didn't want to tell their stories, because when you go on television, there's an insecurity that you have, and there's also a fear about retaliation, which is very understandable. And I also really like data-driven stories. There's a quote that always sticks in my head about no data without stories, no stories without data. And I think that when you can point to a wider issue and then really point to the numbers, that's something that you can't deny. Particularly today I was working on a story about the anti-Asian attacks that are happening. New York City is up 233%. And then you see the face of a person who has been, dealing with that. And you see the people who are on the street who are afraid just to walk outside, who are worried about taking off their masks because now that actually shows what they look like. So those are kind of the main things I would say.
Yeah, I was thinking how television can be the most challenging medium because you have to have so many visuals and you don't get as much time always. But what would be a long story for you in terms of length? And what would you say you've been the most proud of this past year?
So I work on world news, which the segments are typically shorter, but I also do the stuff that goes into prime time. So I worked on Soul of a Nation, which is one of the things that I'm really proud of. And I had the last episode, it was on Reconstruction. And we really went and kind of got at this issue of what is the moment that we're in now? Why is history repeating itself? But also looking at the ways in which, for example, the death penalty, how we had a man, he said, his name's Anthony Ray Hinton. He's one of the longest serving exonerees who was on death row. He was on death row for nearly 30 years. And he said for him watching George Floyd, it was like watching a modern day lynching. But for him also being on death row, he said it's like they took the trees from the outside and brought them inside. And that's how he felt every day, being an innocent man sitting there. So I'm really, really proud of that hour, and actually a lot of the content that we've done over the past year. And I'm hoping that it's seen as an expansion, that we can continue to do more, that they realize that these are stories that we can come from our identities as Black people producing, to then really tell kind of the nuance of what we experience every day.
John, because you're a veteran at the Sun and are leading the team, how do you ensure that reporters of color don't feel pigeonholed, or that other folks in the newsroom don't do stories that, oh, well, that's happening in Black neighborhoods, so that's a race story? Is that something that you've had to contend with? And for you, Zoe and Jasmine, also, if that's something that you can weigh in, but especially with your position, John.
Mm-hmm. So immediately when we formed the diversity committee, I would hear things from some of my white colleagues like, "Oh, I'm not a person of color. I can't join this," or things along those lines, or variations of that. And I would immediately stop them and tell them that, explain that diversity is the responsibility of everyone, and that everyone is represented in diversity. We have diversity of thought, we have diversity of age, gender, socioeconomic class. It's more than just race and ethnicity. And then I would talk to younger Black and brown reporters who might think that, I don't want to necessarily cover that, or, I'm tired of doing this and the other. And I had to remind them that, maybe a generation ago, we wouldn't have been in these positions. We wouldn't have been in these newsrooms. I take it as a proud duty that I have to tell these stories. This is why I got into journalism. I got into journalism because I didn't like the images that I saw represented in media, regardless if it was television or print, wherever it was. I didn't like some of the terms that I heard used. I didn't like the people who were always quoted seemed to be the people with that were caricatures almost. And I knew that was the role of the gatekeepers at that time. And I knew that I wanted to be one of those quote unquote gatekeepers. That was the only way that we could change our images. So I remind our reporters, especially the reporters of color, that in many cases, your grandparents wouldn't have been here and wouldn't have been able to be at the table and express yourself. That's why I feel that it is important that when we get into these rooms that we speak up. I would rather have a white person who is culturally competent and is, pushing for inclusion and equity than a Black person who just simply stays quiet and does nothing. Not all kinfolk or skinfolk. Or not all skinfolk or kinfolk, you know what I mean?
Yeah, we got you.
Yeah. I think it's important to let your voice be heard, and to make sure that you are more than just a number. You are a person who is going to enact some type of change and make sure that your voice counts.
Zoe, what's it been like for you as a younger reporter who's got thrown into the biggest news story in a very long time? But when you're mapping out your future and what you want to do, what do you see, and what has this past year been like for you?
Yeah, okay. I mean, it's been kind of intense, if I'm being honest. I mean, I also started on June 1st, Jasmine, in my role, so that was pretty crazy to, be moving my stuff into my house while the National Guard is outside, and while, there's a curfew, and who knows what's going to happen. So it's been pretty intense. John, I thought it was really interesting. I mean, what you said about thinking about how, our parents or grandparents may not have been in these rooms, and we should, be thankful that we are the ones who are kind of covering stories about race, even if that's not what we necessarily went into the field looking to do. I felt really lucky to be on this communities team that we formed specifically to like uplift stories, focus on people of color around the trial. But yeah, I mean, I think like a lot of journalists, I'm definitely ready to go back to kind of doing my job normally. I've definitely kind of missed working with my colleagues, of course, and so many of them I haven't really gotten to meet. And I really missed kind of just source building normally. But yeah, I mean, I don't think it's like dissuaded me from doing journalism, but I am definitely, it's been nice, you know, with protests and like things like that, like happening again now that it's warmer. It's been nice to like get back to doing that. But John, I was kind of curious, like what advice you had for like young Black reporters about like speaking up in the newsroom.
Just do it. You know, honestly, we are not there to play nice. There are bigger things on, you know, we have bigger fish to fry. We need to think about the fairness factor, quite frankly. Lives are at stake. You know, the way that communities are viewed, those are all things that are at play. And I think that there is no greater time for Black journalists than right now, as a country is shifting in the way that it is looking, or just having new, fresh eyes on these topics that have been around forever. I think we should try and take advantage and ride the wave of interest. And while newsrooms it might be in vogue right now to write these stories, I think we need to write the hell out of these stories, to be honest with you. I think that we need to, at least what I'm going to do, I'm going to continue to write these stories until I'm told I cannot write them any longer. And I'm going to encourage other reporters to do the same. I think, so one thing that I would say that our work affects others in the newsroom, whether you want to see it or not. You will start seeing other people kind of emulate what you're doing, you know, showing them different ways of covering communities that they haven't necessarily seen before. We have our diverse expert database to help reporters who are on deadline or just writing stories from writing about the same white men as experts. You know, we made it easier for reporters to, you know, find people who are different from the usual suspects. We have our cultural competency style guide, and I'm going to keep on talking about these things because I think that they're very important. Language is important, and having the proper language and up-to-date language for reporters only makes our coverage more accurate and fair, and it makes us look smart, and it makes us look like we are actually with it. So our sources are not turned off by us because we have misidentified them, misgendered them, you know, all these types of things that are easy fixes once you are armed with the knowledge and you're able to you know, use best practices in the industry. Did that answer it?
Yeah, it did.
Okay. I think I'll add the John and Jasmine, I don't know if you agree, but the diversity conversation has changed so much since we entered journalism. It was very surface and maybe kind of flat. And I found that a lot of newsrooms were writing about people rather than for them.
Yes.
And I think that there's been a shift in that. And what I think younger reporters like you, Zoe, can bring is you are closer to the ground with a certain generation, and you can amplify voices that other folks in the newsroom aren't going to have access to or know about trends or what's happening, and keep pushing for those stories. And if they probably aren't going to say no now, like maybe they would have in the past. And I'm not picking on the strip. I'm talking more industry wide, but this is the the time to get those stories in, and to, and if they say no, you just keep, like, one day someone's gonna be tired, you're gonna get another editor, or it's gonna be a slow news day, and they'll say, go for it. So I would lean into your youth, because young reporters have different access. Everybody has different access to communities or their sourcing, but I would lean into that. A lot of, this was going to be one of my questions anyway, and I see that it's coming up a lot in the chat, and that is how to take care of yourself. I know for me last year, covering COVID deaths and racial disparities, and then George Floyd's murder happening, and everything that was happening in Chicago, it was difficult. And I know I personally cried a lot after I got off the phone with loved ones who lost someone from COVID. And then you have to balance going out, or, doing the localizing the Floyd coverage. Our newsroom in June gave everybody an extra day off as a mental health day. Some of us have been asking for 1 day a month, and that's not part of our paid time off, but it was a good gesture then. I know how I take care of myself is sometimes just unplugging, and it's okay, I think, to unplug even if you're in the news, not going on social media, maybe watching a little ratchet TV to get your mind off of what's happening. But this is a theme that people are asking. So how do you all take care of yourselves?
I'll be honest in that this is a lesson I'm perpetually trying to learn. I am a person that goes at things all kind of gung-ho, and then I burn out. And I've definitely probably hit another round of burnout after the past year. So for me, it's really realizing when I'm reaching that point, like, what is going on and when do I need to hit the pause on myself? And also, when am I taking on too many projects? And I think also realizing that we can't do it all. I think that unfortunately, as people of color, it feels like we have this moment that we have to capture, that we have this, proof of concept, that we have to do the Black stories, do the diversity stories to show that they matter and that they can be done. And if we don't do it, then we're going to lose this moment. And I think at some point we have to have real conversations with our newsrooms to say, okay, are we buying into this or not? Is this sticking or is it not? Sorry, I'm going to grab my cat.
The cat wants to be on camera.
Yeah, he steals my sunshine all the time. He's a big baby, wants to be held. But it's, I try to do meditation in the mornings. I try to unplug on my days off when I can. I try to take trips here or there, just like small things within COVID. And I think also talking to your friends, because they are good measures of how you're doing. They see things that you don't see.
Mm-hmm.
I did a story talking to like Black mental health experts and like Black community leaders about that here, and just how people in the Twin Cities are facing a lot of trauma, especially communities of color. And I learned a lot from the people I talked to about meditation and about taking like 10 deep breaths in the morning when you wake up and right before you go to bed and stuff like that. I take a lot of walks, and I have been living for like outdoor picnic drinks with my like friends and coworkers here. I mean, doing that like when it was warm, and then now that it's warm again has just been such a blessing, honestly. And I've taken up reading a lot because I get tired of looking at my screen. So I probably read like 2 books a week now, which is kind of a lot more than I used to. But yeah, I mean, talking to all the like Black therapists here who have seen a crazy need for their services here and nationally, I learned so much. And I was just on the phone with them, just like, tell me everything. Will it all fit in the story? No, but I'm writing it all down for like me and my friends. So that was pretty awesome.
I think everyone needs like a palate cleanser, to be honest with you. At the end of the day, you need something that's going to take your mind away from what you are doing at work. So for me, I watch tons of television shows. I think I've watched more TV than should be allowed, but it is giving me a sense of escapism that's definitely needed. For the newsroom, we were able to bring in towards the beginning of the pandemic, we were able to bring in a few Black therapists to talk to the newsroom and lead discussions about what they could do. So one did like a guided meditation and answered a lot of questions that people might have had. It was great because he was a former Sun reporter who left and became a therapist. So he knew the unique issues that we were dealing with. So that was great. But at the end of the day, I have to go back to remember that if we're not here to do this work and to do these stories, other people might not necessarily do them justice. So I find solace in that, in knowing that that if certain language is used for these stories, like making sure that we're not using the word riot, and that we're using protest or something that's less racially charged. Just knowing that looking at the history of the paper or papers in general, and knowing that at some point papers endorsed segregation or ran runaway slave ads. Guess who wasn't in the newsroom when those things were happening? And guess who didn't have a voice when those decisions were being made? Us. So I think that while we have those opportunities, we need to make the most of it. And yeah, if you're a younger person who doesn't necessarily feel confident, remember the people of this organization who fought to make sure that you are in those newsrooms now. Being silent, being scared is doing their memory or their legacy an extreme, injustice. I think that, we are a strong people. We are a proud people. We have a strong and long history in this country. We need to honor the generations, before us who didn't have these opportunities. And I think it is a responsibility and a duty, an important duty for us to make sure that these stories are coming out there and that they are accurate and that they reflect the richness of our culture and community.
There's been some pushback in popular culture over Black trauma porn. Mm-hmm. And as journalists, it's our job to reflect the stories that are happening. But how do you balance here's something else terrible that happened to a Black community where I live or where I'm covering, with aspects of Black joy?
I can talk a little bit about that. That was one of the things we did a Juneteenth special, and I was, when it got greenlit, I was a little concerned that I was going to be that, oh, well, here we go, like talking about all the worst things about Black people. And I pitched a segment because one of the things that's kind of in Black joy is Black pain, and the ways in which we find and create in moments of great misery and stress. So I did a segment that was just looking at music and like John Coltrane's song Alabama that came out of the church bombing there. And all of these protest songs that we now have that have created community and brought us closer together. But I think that's actually an area where we haven't figured it out just yet. I think it's hard because how do you tell people that the story is real without showing it to them? But then how do you also not traumatize people over and over and traumatize yourself by showing the video again and again? And I really feel for the people who covered the George Floyd trial. because that is, watching that day in and day out, I can't even imagine. So I do think that we're reaching a period in which we have to figure it out, where we have to reinvent, where we have to think about what we're trying to achieve. I think our first step was getting the stories told, and we're there now in a lot of instances. The fact that we're shedding light on things, but I think the next step is being more mindful of how we're telling them and what we're doing when we're telling them.
When Dante Wright was killed a few weeks ago, an editor kind of assigned myself and another reporter of color to do a story about how people of color are re-traumatized or something like that, and it kind of rubbed us both the wrong way that we weren't asked whether we felt like that was appropriate, because a lot of our coverage is touching on how every day with the trial people are being re-traumatized watching the George Floyd and everything being live streamed. So we kind of were maybe not. And we ended up kind of going out there and doing a story about the neighbors, which there are a lot of Black people who live right in that area near that police precinct where, protesters and the police were kind of back and forth for a little over a week. And we talked to neighbors and stood right there while, they were getting tear gas, thrown into the hallway of their apartments. And we felt what we did was a story that had more that wasn't just a trauma porn, Black people are sad because we're sad every day watching this, on YouTube while we try to do our work. So we kind of were able to get around it a little bit by finding another narrative that seemed more important. But I think that's a great question and something that we should all be thinking about, because I don't know, it's a fine line to walk, I think, for sure.
Zoe, did you all push back on the editors on the front end, or did you go out and report and then come back and say, you know what, this is what we got instead?
Yeah, it was definitely more on the back end. The reporter I was working with.
You're learning how to, you're learning the tricks of a veteran.
Yes.
I think it's important to have just because stories. White people get to enjoy just because stories that are not linked to their race, their ethnicity, their being. They just get those stories. They've automatically always had those stories. With us, there's always some type of hook or, link to justify why they're writing about us in certain ways. I try and bombard our editors and with stories that are just because stories, or stories that tell stories of everyday life with Black people. So let me give you an example. I'm sure people saw the jobs numbers that came out in December that showed that all of the jobs lost during December were women, and particularly Black and brown women. Everyone did that story. It was out there. But I saw, a couple months later, an opportunity to tell the story of the resiliency of Black and brown women and women of color who started jobs during the pandemic and pivoted. So this is also important, I'd say, for reporters. Always think about art, always think about photo and images, because that will get you better play in the paper. So I did a story focusing on 3 or 4 women who either switched careers during the pandemic or shifted their pivoted their model, their business model. One Black woman made these gourmet fortune cookies. Another Black woman who was late, who received a buyout from an airline company, wound up making her own brand of designer hula hoops and now teaches hula hoop classes at Lake Montebello and has had really good success with that. Another woman, a Filipina, closed her coffee shop only to open a roastery. And then she's now going to build, reopen a coffee shop that's bigger and better than it was, before it shut down. So showing, this resiliency in people of color, which we know we have, from having many doors shut and not having everything handed to us. We get creative and we do things a little different, and we succeed and survive. That story ran on the front page of the paper with an image of the Black woman who was hula hooping. So you have an image of, this is anti-trauma porn right there. You know what I mean? You are seeing Black joy right there. I think it's important to always get buy-in from your visuals teams for print people, so that you can have something that is really strong visually that might get better play as a centerpiece on the front page. I've found a lot of success doing that with these stories, so that even if a person doesn't read the entire story, they are seeing an image of a Black person that's not linked to, I don't know, drugs, crime, something of that nature, or sorrow. They're seeing a Black person showing and exhibiting joy. They're seeing a Black person being successful in business. These are all things that I think that we need on a regular basis to shift that conversation and provide some type of equity and show us as like a whole community and not just a segment or some type of monolith.
Ruby Bailey says, exactly, John. We do plenty of just because stories in predominantly white communities. Aaliyah asks, how do you remain objective as a reporter? My answer is that there's no such thing as objectivity. We all bring experiences to the newsroom, and we try to be fair and balanced, not in the Fox News way, of course. But those life experiences, I think, can also help shape coverage and give access to stories that wouldn't be there otherwise. And Jasmine, I think about what you said at the top of the hour about staffers saying what their own experiences were with policing. So do any of you all think about the objectivity question? And also, I should say there isn't another side to segregation or to racism. So I, don't believe in that. Both sidism is not objectivity. That's fake.
I personally, I hate that question for the simple fact that white people are never asked that. It's always funny that we're always asked about objectivity covering these issues when our white colleagues can basically just go through life and it's just assumed that they will be objective. I think it's a loaded question to begin with that is usually pointed towards us when we are dealing with issues that people know are completely unfair. I agree, Natalie. There is no other side to, the Klan or, making sure, or like the protest in Charlottesville. I don't need to have their perspective. They wish us dead. That's not that's a non-negotiable. It's just wrong. It's flat out. There's no other side to it. There's no good people on both sides argument. It's just wrong. Period.
I think also, when you think about objectivity and this notion of neutrality, it was designed by, predominantly white journalist institutions. So objective, neutral is white. It's not with us in mind. It's not with a diversity of thought of what other experiences are. It's a predominant narrative that is assumed to be neutral. And I think we have to be mindful of what that is. And also, when that comes at you and someone says that you can't be objective because you come from that community, I would say, actually, you are the person that's best designed to tell that story. because you know where the pitfalls are. You know what the stereotypes have been of that community. You know the stories that haven't been told, and you see people for people. You see the fathers, you see the people who are struggling just to make a living. You don't see people who are, on quote unquote rough, or you see people for people, and you tell the story like that. This is a person who has fallen on hard times, and that is why they've wound up in jail or prison, or in whatever unfortunate situation they might be in.
William Young asks, how do you define diversity, and what metric should one use to know if you've achieved it?
To me, it's being representative of what the U.S. currently looks like. I think at some point we'll also reach a point where we could say, like, maybe it's more forward thinking in what the U.S. should look like. But I think we have work to do just in terms of overall representation within the newsroom, and also within our stories. So, it's diversity when it comes to disabilities. It's diversity when it comes to LGBTQ+. It's diversity when it comes to race and ethnicity. As John was saying about social economic backgrounds, diversity of where people come from in the United States. And I think it's a hard, when you get to that point, it's like a really grand metric to do. But I think that it's being mindful of the fact that you are, particularly for us, we are, on the East Coast, and a lot of news winds up coming from the coastal areas, from the East and the West Coast, and being mindful of what is happening in the rest of America, and who knows what's happening and who has an eye into that.
Elena says on this subject, she recommends the book, The View from Somewhere, Undoing the Myth of Journalistic Objectivity by Lewis Raven Wallace, who also happens to be a former colleague of mine at WBZ. So we are nearing the end of our time. I really want to thank our panelists for their candor and their advice and sharing their experiences. And I'm going to turn it back over to National. I think someone from National was going to wrap up. Okay, looks like not. Looks like I am the one who is doing the closeout. So thanks to these questions. Thanks for your participation, and everyone have a great evening.
Thank you. And just one
Thank
quick
you.
shameless plug. We are always hiring. We're hiring at the Sun. We are looking for talented reporters and editors, but particularly we are definitely looking for editors, Black editors, quite frankly. And please hit me up and see what positions we have open, and I will be happy to put you in touch with the right people. Thank you.
Good night, everyone.